I know I must have heard the sound of the cicadas the moment I stepped outside of the airplane upon landing in Nairobi. Everybody does. I remember the experience, but I can no longer recollect the sound, the high-pitched whistle that instantly greets your ears when you step up to the front door of the East African equator. The sound was so extreme that it startled me and made me instinctively turn to get back on the plane. The pilot yelled at me, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," and shut the door. I smelled the mixture of burning wood and dung that floated through every pore of everything, and I was afraid. I was 13, so I'm going to cut myself some slack. But I can be honest, I was scared to death. I was becoming a meerkat. Listen, this is important. That same wood smell would come to be one of comfort for me, a favorite. It stayed in my hair and clothing for months after we returned to the States. Our friends said we smelled differently after we came back. At first I was offended until I realized it was still there. It lingered in the ethnography for years. And I think that if I were to get a whiff of that smell now, after so many years, I would dissolve before you in tears, or a pile of ash left from wood and cow dung. Nairobi awoke every day to the sound of the muezzin broadcasting his morning prayer from the mosque downtown. His voice projected everywhere, wavering in and out with the winds depending on the day's atmosphere. Such a lovely way to start a day, a tribute to the dawn. And in Nairobi, the morning chorus didn't just reverberate with the calls of unfamiliar birds. It roared. It was profoundly loud, so that sleeping in was not usually an option. Back in Wisconsin, we were tortured by a weird type of crow with a metallic sound to its caw. But here in Kenya, oh my, the background ambient sound, born of every civilized human community, which grows out of traffic, electricity, and people's voices, is, in Nairobi too, at its heart, a metallic undercurrent. A snare drum could accompany this noisy parade nicely. Out in the bush, however, away from all of the above, that ambient sound is animal and nature. There is no human sound other than voice out in the bush. The hum of life is a lower tone than that of the city, audibly different, in fact. A djembe drum would be better for that parade. Each morning, Adam and I joined the daily civilized parade to go to our schools. Adam's school, Kilimani School for boys, was in the opposite direction of mine, State House School for girls. We said our goodbyes at the corner, 1 block from the house, and went off to our respective sites. We began recognizing people that we saw every day. Other kids walking, the fruit vendors, the coffee kiosk owners, people piled in their cars and on bikes, on buses, and on the way to work or market. Kenyans are very friendly and they wave at anyone passing by. At least they did then. We felt inordinately popular, so when Mom found a house for us to move into, Adam and I were happy that it was very nearby where we'd been living for the last several months. It never occurred to us that people might recognize the two of us as well. What were we thinking? We proceeded every step we took with a wave. We thought Jomo Kenyatta's Harambee wave was the best thing in the world and routinely hollered it out to anyone passing by. We actually had the opportunity to see him on television before we left the States, so we were prepared the first time we witnessed it. What a flair Jomo had for the dramatic. Most important to the call was the word Harambee, which is really more an idea or a philosophy than a simple word. Let us work together as one to be stronger. Jomo's shtick was to raise his hand over his head and snap a fly whisk made of a colobus monkey's tail. The whisk was significant in what it represented to people, black and white. The colobus monkey is now often poached for his tail, a black and white bush of a thing, about 2 feet long. Jomo, though, chose the tail for its colors and what they signified to the unity of its peoples. He used the tail as part of his rally call throughout his campaign, which followed the Mau Mau Revolution. The colors of the tail, black and white, represent the separation and the consequential unity of Africans and colonials. So Jomo raised his whisk, and when he was sure everyone was watching, he brought the whisk down through the air like a sword, making it whoosh. His wonderfully basso profundo voice shouted the call, "Hurrah!" And here the whisk is raised. Bang! The whisk is brought down with force and determination. We loved it. Here, try it with me. Here we go. Hurrah! Bang! There weren't many white grown-ups answering his wave, let alone little white kids. We both learned it was a great way to look like everyone else, which had always been Dad's best advice. Plus, we were feeling Kenyan already. We still had a shade of fear or common sense, but we were feeling more and more at ease every day. It was easy to feel at home waking up in the Garden of Eden. We were already falling in love with Africa. We must have been funny, though, waving at anyone and everyone with every step through the neighborhood like a couple of human solar flares. Jambo, Jambo Sana, we called to our new Rafikis. Hello to our friends. The house we moved into was beautiful. It was a big 7-bedroom, 5-bathroom, 2-story sprawl covered with fuchsia-colored bougainvillea. We had driven by the home every day, either to look at it or to see if it was up for let yet, depending on Mom's mood. The house's bright pink facade had curative powers for Mom. Another flower in the garden, which I never did find, put out the most wonderful smell of lemon and mint. I sometimes purposely walked the drive just to drink in the sweet, refreshing air. Bees hummed all over the roundabout, my personal motorcade. This home, like most of the larger homes, had been built by the Indian colonial community, which had settled in Kenya just after the Revolution. There was a center garden in front, around which was the driveway. We called it a roundabout, something my parents had to learn to navigate when they came to Nairobi. That was an exciting time, watching them both learning to drive their left-hand drive Sunbeam Imp on the left side of the road in a third world country. "Having this damn left-hand drive side of my bumper is just asking for trouble over here," my father complained. "It's like they speed up or something." I think my folks may have decided that everyone should have to learn to navigate a roundabout. More of that sink or swim philosophy. So we all had a crack at ours. When my older brother Chris came to visit and picked me up from school one day, he surrendered the steering wheel to me without any warning, just for fun with big brotherness. "Here," he teased, "it's time you learned." And then he just sort of flopped over in my lap, away from the wheel. I grabbed the wheel as he knew I would, circling the roundabout several times, screaming. I finally crash-stopped into one of the hedges after Chris hit the brakes. I was thrilled with my first piloting experience. It was just as much fun as the roundabouts downtown. So from that day on, when we exited our roundabout in the car, we did at least one extra lap around it before leaving the drive, and we went really fast. The homes surrounding gardens were Italian, beautifully groomed by Njoroge, the gardener, who worked and lived at the home before us. I returned to the States with a terrific picture of a guy who looked just like Njoroge. I call the photo the most beautiful man in the world. He looks to be about 200 years old, but we had no idea how old he was. He's standing in a chicken coop, holding a basket full of chicken's eggs and grinning ear to ear. Njoroge was missing many of his teeth, and he too had big, loopy ears. He was proof to me that there is happy, and then there is happy. To each his own. Every day he could be found somewhere in the garden fighting roses and burning grasses or rescuing little critters. He kept the grounds in perfect condition, predator safe too. Fearful little hedgehogs rolled around on the front lawns like spiky croquet balls. I saw Njoroge rescue a little hedgie that had gotten himself trapped amidst a group of ladies in the garden one afternoon. My mother was hosting a tea party when Njoroge came walking towards us very firmly, bent over, arms outstretched before him. He was laughing and cackling, determined to rescue Hedgie before one of the ladies trod upon him. The poor wee creature had rolled right up to protect himself, and in doing so couldn't see a thing. He was was absolutely trembling. Njorogi, our hero, picked up the hedgehog and carried him to the hedge. Of course. The ladies all drifted back to the party, tittering at the many well-earned jokes about African tea parties and their guests. Fruit trees lined the street side of the house. People would stop there to pick the fruit from which they made pombe, homemade beer. Yeah. It took several weeks before what we had been witnessing became clear. The type of tree was not very important to the true aficionado of pombe. Any fruit would do. If a home had a hedge that bore fruit, it was sure to also bear constant outside harvesting. When Njorogi chased people off when he himself was not indulging in the pombe, people raided the trees almost every day. "Way!" we heard him scream one night. Njorogi was known to occasionally chase folks off with a panga knife, which earned him a reputation as a badass. But I knew better. I'd seen him with the hedgehog. He came home every evening, bombed senseless, and headed straight for the chicken coop, where he slept, even though he had a pretty decent house with some pads for a bed, about 50 feet from where he landed. My mother worried about him for about a month until she realized he was a happy man who wanted to be left alone with his fruit and his chickens. Very late at night, when the world was at its most quiet, I liked to listen to Njorogi quietly snoring from inside the coop. Answered the chicks. Whispered the night.